Mr. Eddie Prince from the Arkansas Forage Grassland Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eddie.
If I can operate the equipment, I'll be all right, maybe. I'm Eddie Prince from Pocahontas, Arkansas, which is in the northeast part of Arkansas. I'd like to thank the Arkansas Forage and Grassland Council for sponsoring me to come up here and having the opportunity to speak. A little bit of background about my upbringing and how I ended up in the grass production grazing business. I'm a third generation farmer rancher from northeast Arkansas. Spent most of my life row crop farming, as did my father and my grandfather. In the last few years, we have owned this farm that we're going to talk about here this morning. It consists of about 600 acres of grassland and some more land that is in woodland. I spent, like as I said, most of my life in the row crop business. In 2003, I quit row cropping and was continuing, had a partnership with a neighbor and was in the alfalfa hay business, which is not the best business in the world in Arkansas, but it was a profitable deal with a little bit of tweaking. And then I, in 2005 and 6, began to try to utilize the pasture land that we had in order to start a grazing business after having read and studied for several years the ideas of others on management intensive grazing, as well as the things that can be accomplished as far as forage production by limiting grazing of the animals, as well as the trampling effect and the other things that can be accomplished by doing these things. So in 2005 and 6, like I said, we started in partnership with my father and my brother, grazing business. We had been primarily a cow-calf operation, and running at times up to 120 cows. Had began to scale that down and began to buy stockers and start a grazing program with the stocker business. After some study and, as I said, and considering some of the things that some of the other people had done, we decided to do this. We have a kind of a unique situation in Randolph County. If you divide the county from northeast to southwest, it is essentially bottomland in the eastern part, which is the beginning of the greater Mississippi River Delta. The western part, which is where the farm is located, is the foothills of the Ozarks. These are rolling hills and creek bottoms. This is a layout of the farm. As you can tell, there's several areas that are wooded. These are hill areas. There's a bottom area here. This is not a typical idea here. This was we've had 2 major floods in the last 5 years, and picture was taken when one of the floods this is hay ground and bottomland that he had flooded. This is actually the tail end of a watershed lake, which the dam is down here off of our property. This, like as I said, was a cow-calf operation. When we've got a few cows left, or mostly a stocker operation now, about 600 acres of forage, running about 281 animal units, which is approximately 2.1 acres per animal units. As is typical of our area, we're about 55% fescue clover, 25% Bermuda and Lespedeza, and then 20% mixed grasses. The area is creek bottoms and rolling hills and woodlots, as you can tell here. This is a creek bottom area. This is primarily Bermuda grass. These were obviously taken when the grass was going dormant. This is fescue and clover here, transitioning into some other grasses right here, going toward the woods. The improvements that we've been made this is kind of the mixture that we're looking for. Is about a half Bermuda grass, half fescue type mixture. This is a fescue clover mixture that we did with an experiment we'll talk about a little later that we did incorporating the clover into the fescue when we started the 300-day grazing program, which we've been a participant in. The idea of management intensive grazing, after going to several producers' farms that are known industry-wide as grazers, after reading several articles about the systems that they used, we decided to begin this idea of management intensive grazing. And so in order to minimize our costs, we did it very simply and have not changed our process since then. Now, this is not something that goes over big with people that are selling fencing equipment, but this is the way we've done it for the last 5 years, handling a few thousand head of calves that have come from 7 different states, sale-born cattle that are put together by order buyers, and this has worked great for us, very few problems. The system that we used, and as I said, when we started this, we started using this system because it was simple, simplest way to do it, and in order to not spend a whole lot of money but see if the idea of the grazing would work. We initially laid off an area that was 1 acre, put approximately 50 head of cows in there, and started from there. My brother asked me when we started, said, how are we going to do this? I said, we're going to measure off an acre, put up a fence, and see what happens. This fencing system that we use is single-strand poly wire that's run in a loop for the most part. The charger is here on a step-in pigtail post. This is a T-post that is 4 feet long. That is originally they were used. You bought them at the local co-op. They're used to put levee gates in rice fields. But this T-post has a clip-on insulator right there. I made this PVC pipe, 2-inch pipe, cut a slot in it where I could slide it down over the post, over the insulator, still connect the wire here and wrap the wire around that for tension. The reason we do that is that we do not just reel the wire out and hang the reel somewhere. I realize this is kind of unconventional too. We take the wire, run around whatever area we're going to fence, and when we get the wire out that we need, we tie it together and cut the wire. This wire has a jillion knots in it. But electric fencing is not a physical barrier, it's a psychological barrier. And as such, once the cattle are brought to the fence, once they are taught what it is about, which takes about 12 to 24 hours, then for the most part you have no problems, or we have had no problems with this. I realize it's not exactly conventional the way that people do it, but it's the way that we've done it, and we've had good luck with doing it that way. This is a typical scene of where the cattle are being held at this time. That's a pond in the background, which we just recently cleaned out during this drought. Step-in plastic post with a single wire. This is a lead steer, Jersey steer, that is quite beneficial as far as the psychological aspect of grazing cattle, which is something that we don't hear a whole lot talked about. But a lot of these calves do not know how to graze, and if you have some kind of an animal in there, whether it's an old cow, a steer, or whatever, that can teach those cattle how to move, teach them what to graze, then it is of quite a bit of benefit because they will begin grazing sooner and be more satisfied with the area that they're put into. That's me stepping in posts up there. This is one of the areas where we have had some progressive improvement through grazing. This is a very poor hill, and all of this area at one time was just like this. This is native grasses of poor quality soil. This is an area where we began feeding in a kind of a systematic pattern, and as a result you can see this is Bermuda grass that has been established simply by feeding on the ground and utilizing the fact that the waste from the hay and the waste from the cattle, and has increased the fertility of that ground and has made it a better pasture, obviously, from the picture there. The things that we've incorporated into our program is the idea of the clover demonstration, which were assisted by Dr. Jennings and Kenny Simon, who were instrumental in getting us in the 300-day grazing program, as well as our local county agent, Mike Andrews. When we began that grazing program, which has been quite successful, for the 3 years that we first began it, we got 300 days of grazing, 310 days of grazing, and 260-something days of grazing the last year. One of the reasons that the 260 days is because we got into a drought situation. We were low on water. We were not out of forage, but we went ahead and and if you will, hemmed the cattle up in an area where we could feed them, and went ahead and started feeding them. It was of two benefits to doing that. One, we didn't have to put out a whole lot of fencing in order to go to a water source. And two, by not completely utilizing all the forage that was available in the fall, when we came back next spring, the grass recovered sooner. So we incorporated the things in the 300-day grazing program, which was forage inventory. Then we did soil testing, which we had been pretty much up on soil testing all the years that we had had the place. Did hay analysis. We also have hosted some field days where you get both present what you're doing and get ideas from others of what the systems that they're using. One of the things that we did do, and we will probably put in some water lines, but initially when we set out to do this grazing idea was to keep it as simple as possible in order to first determine what we had there and where we would go from there. That's why we quit doing any permanent fencing or anything that needed repaired, use the temporary fences, and utilize the stock ponds that we had, the surface water that we had. These are Halloween plastic buckets that you can buy at Walmart for $1 a piece around Halloween. They've got rocks in the bottom for ballast, got pieces of styrofoam in them with expanding foam on top, and a broken plastic post there. You can tie it to the poly wires, drag it across the pond, whether it be a corner. This is just a corner. The pond runs about right here, or you can drag it all the way across the pond, however you want to run the thing in order to make it work. We also have done some trials. We did some mineral injection trials versus non-mineral injection trials and some other things in the experiments. This is Dr. Jennings and Kenny Simon when we were establishing this clover demonstration. Clover was planted in strips on 30% of the ground rather than being uniformly spread over all the ground. The grazing paddocks were then run perpendicular to the clover strips, and the clover was spread by the cattle by utilizing it at the correct time in order to get the seed and spread the seed through the manure. As a result of this overseeding project, we figured in 2010 that we saved around $17,000 on our forage costs that we would have had to put into other forages in order to maintain the feeding system. We've had in the last 5 years 200-year floods, one major ice storm in which we were out of power for 19 days at my house, which is on the farm, and 2 severe droughts. The thing that we have learned, and that you have to consider when you're doing this, is that weed control, even up to the consumption of greenbriers, can be accomplished with grazing cattle if it's done at the right time, which you can't always do. Ground cover, very important. Keep all those bare spots covered, and therefore you will retain moisture and do a better job of providing the moisture to the plants that they need. Rest for the forages. A cow doesn't feed like a hummingbird. A hummingbird hovers over what they're consuming. A cow grazes it, and within a short period of time will step on it again, and you have to consider that. So the rest for the forage is very important, and the fertility. Spreading the manure so that the fertility will be spread out over the whole entire area. People say I'm not in the forage business. I mean, I'm not in the cattle business. I am in the forage business. This is what you want, grazing cattle. But our experience putting cattle together is you do not always get the cattle that you want and that best utilizes the forage. So we do feed them. This is a feeding system. These are mining belting. This is a feed box where you drive down the belting. They do a pretty good job of not wasting any feed if you put the length of the belting out according to the number of cattle that you're trying to feed, with about 18 inches per calf. We're trying to optimize production. You have necessary evils of hay, feed, medicine, water, and weed control that you have to contend with. The one thing that is very seldom talked about is the money deal. If you're successful, which we were successful in accomplishing the things that we wanted to do with the system, but you still have to borrow the money unless you've got really deep pockets in order to utilize the forage, the increase in the forage production. And that's something to consider. So you have to observe, have to plan, and have to implement. and have to consider the things that will happen if you're successful in what you do in order that you can best utilize what you're trying to produce out there. Thank you.
Are there questions? This presentation, Mr. Prince.
I guess you want this.
Yeah. I want to repeat the question there so everybody can hear that.
The question was, what was the belting that it's mine belting that a guy that buys Califorce from Kentucky brought to us. It's about 3.5 to 4 feet wide, and you can, with the box that I had there, that you can drive down that, open the box up, and we try to feed about 5 pounds a day per head. That's because the cattle, that's to keep the cattle that are on the lower end up with the cattle that are on the upper end that will really gain on grass in order that we can kind of sell them all at the same time.